Tell us something that always makes you smile.
My kids.
Oh, that's nice.
And my cat.
Which one more? Maybe the cat. So welcome to the sofa, Claire Hollands, CEO of Saatchi Saatchi. So what does after work mean to you?
After work means to me relaxation at the end of the day. It means time with my family, time with my husband, time with myself.
None of those sound relaxing.
They can be. It's just different. It's just finding a different gear. I think it's trying to switch out of that go, go, go into more of a, just a sort of a loaf around.
Yeah. You've written recently about being in the sandwich generation and the pressures that puts on that generation of people. Can you explain for anyone who doesn't know what that means and how it affects you personally?
So the sandwich generation is people that have kids. Of any age. My kids are quite little, they're 5 and 8, so they've got quite a lot of, they're sort of high dependency still. And then I think it's the sandwich is the other end of the spectrum where you have parents that are ageing and just need more support and more care than you have sort of previously had. And so you kind of have the sandwiches sort of being squeezed at both ends and, the reality of having big jobs sort of in the middle, basically. And I think there's so many people that are in that sandwich that don't even necessarily recognise it. And I think it's one of those things where often it can gradually creep up on you.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you reflect and go, yeah, actually I am sort of being pulled in two directions, and that creates its own pressures around how you find that balance.
And what do we do about it when we're feeling the pressure? Because I feel a bit like I've been coping, and if someone throws one more thing my way, I think it will all implode.
Yeah.
What do you advise people who need to cope with the pressures of being pulled in many different directions?
I mean, I think my scenario was interesting because I think it had been creep with my parents. And then there was a sort of a crisis moment where it kind of really brought it home, the reality of the situation. It made me recognise it. It also made me talk about it at work because I did need to step out, be working a bit more remotely. And to be honest, I think I just needed some emotional support for people to understand that I wasn't probably going to always be showing up as my best self at that time. And interestingly, it was literally only about 3 months into my Saatchi's job. So from a job perspective, it was, nobody could help it, but it was quite hard timing because you're actually landing in a new business with new people. Like looking back at it, I think in a funny way, it was one of the most sort of powerful things that happened in my sort of leadership onboarding at Saatchi's, because I had to show vulnerability and be confident enough in myself and my leadership to show that vulnerability very early on. And I think it created quite a sort of special conversation in an unexpected way with my leadership team, because I don't think they'd actually ever seen anybody do that before. And I think it gave them their own permission to think about their own vulnerabilities and how they wanted to show up at work. I think my advice to people would be, I do believe sort of problem shared is a problem halved. And actually, if you can't do that with people at work, I think that's a bigger question about have you got the right people around you? And are you in the right environment for where you are at that point in your career or your life, I guess, would be my bigger question.
And before we go on to talk about how you share your vulnerable state with others, can you just tell us a bit about your situation? You've got 2 very small kids.
Yeah.
And then what happened with your parents that meant you needed to lean in a little bit more?
My mum has just suffered with really difficult mental health. And it's one of those things where it's kind of got more complex over time. And I think my dad over time basically has become a full-time carer. And again, I think it's often that thing, I'm an only child, and so I'm the only one that has the perspective of both of them. And it was actually me saying to my dad, you have become a full-time carer. He hadn't even recognised that in himself, which is so common, I think, in truth. I think the other reality is because it's a mental health issue, it's not just fixable overnight, and what you have to kind of come to terms with is a new normal, is what I call it. You also have to accept the fact that that new normal, you need to find a sustainable rhythm that you can support both your parents and keep the family rhythm going at home and keep a handle on your job. And so obviously there's crisis moments in it, and then you can rush back and everything drops and everything changes. But actually that isn't a sustainable way to manage the sandwich. And so I think, you know, sort of a year or 18 months in, I sort of had that moment of really the only person that can actually sort of manage this is myself. And it's not easy.
No, how do you tweak your pace? Because that sounds like a very smart bit of advice when you're being pulled in many directions, but work is at a very fast pace. Do you have any tips for how to manage that?
If you run your battery down, then actually you can't do any of those things. You can't look after your kids. You can't be a good partner to you know, to my husband. You can't do your job properly, and you actually can't look after your parents. So I think it's being really disciplined around knowing your own sort of battery levels and just knowing when to recharge. And actually, I had a coach that said something really interesting to me, which he said, your recharge moments are quite big ones. It's going for a run or it's going out for drinks with friends. And I think I've really thought about that because it is much easier to sort of fit it into the chaos.
We've been doing a bit of work on founders and how they cope with the pressure of running a business. And all of them have said how routine and strict they have to be with their boundaries and their time. Otherwise, work can eat up everything.
Yeah.
Did you ever have that point where you were like, where are the bits I can really add value in my job and the other bits are going to have to go?
I think the boundaries thing is a really helpful way of thinking about things. I definitely think when I went back to work, I had to do a whole load of, as so many people do as returning parents, like a real reset of actually what are the boundaries. But I think it is about setting them and then holding yourself like accountable to them, and also just doing it in a guilt-free way. Sometimes those boundaries feel like you're letting people down and you have to flip it in your head and go, but I'm doing something important for this person over here. It's back to that, you just can't do everything and keep everybody happy all the time.
You've also been quite positive about the effect that the sandwich generation can have on leadership. Can you tell me, because we're always quite, it's really hard, the pressure's a lot, we're being pulled in different directions. What's the positive side of it?
Do you know what? Somebody said to me that the sandwich sort of position should be called the hidden layer advantage. And I just thought that was such lovely language for two reasons. One, because I think it tells the truth of the hidden layer, which is so often you don't know what is going on in people's lives and at home, and everyone has their thing. It might not be the sandwich, but for most people there is complexity in their lives that they are trying to navigate, that you don't always know what's going on in people's lives, and therefore to give people the benefit of the doubt or the space or the environment in which if they want to share, they can.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would say is I think it has taught me a lot about myself. It's taught me a lot around resilience. It's taught me a lot about what really matters. And in a funny way, I think it's actually made me quite critical around where I point my time and my energy.
Are there a couple of tips that you could go through to help anybody who's in our situation?
Take a step back and really reflect on your situation and almost that moment of recognition of the sandwich that you're in and what that really means for your setup is kind of the first step, like recognising you are a sandwicher.
Yeah.
I think the second thing I would say is look after yourself in that sandwich, because you're the glue to everything and you have to find a way of protecting yourself. And the third thing I would say is I have definitely found being vulnerable or sharing the reality of my situation, not just at work, but with friends, I think is definitely the three things that I would say.
The pressure of being pulled in many different directions is often means that we lose people to our industry rather than retaining talent by giving them tools as to how to cope with it. How do we avoid that? Like, I know we've given some great tips about how to cope, but there is a part of you that just wants to explode everything when the pressure's too much rather than tweaking.
I sort of remember saying to somebody when I was working on a big retailer, like, it was always so fast paced. And then I remember having a week where like for some reason there was like a gap between workflow, and I almost was like, didn't know what to do with myself, because I kind of missed the adrenaline of the pace. So I think there's a recognition that that is a part of the industry, and I think you either love that and want it or you don't. And maybe working that out early on is actually quite important.
You can work it out early on, but because your priorities change when you either have kids or you're
Yes.
caring, it might be that there's a shift. So I think it's constantly asking
Yes.
yourself that question, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then I think there's a thing around, well, we also can't be operating on sort of like, you know, Duracell bunnies the whole time. So how do I then manage that balance even in those environments? And particularly once you have kids, and you do need to be able to find that balance and that moment, you know, to go home. And then I think it really is about your own discipline around where you make the greatest impact, and learning to be quite ruthless with your time. And that actually progress is better than perfection is a phrase I've always really liked. Like, I think often we have quite high standards and high aspirations, and actually that becomes impossible. So for me, 80% good or right is better than the 100% the whole time. And then I think the other thing is just share the load and teamwork and passing the ball and all those good things.
What's your biggest professional mistake?
Turning up probably for an exam where I was going to a party afterwards. I realised that everyone was suited and booted, and I was in a quite outrageous fancy dress outfit, and I didn't have time to go back and change.
What was the theme, Claire?
I was dressed as a nurse. And
For a medical exam?
For a medical exam. Going to Vodpool. And if you failed the year. It was very, like, not, you know, couldn't not do it. And so I went in and I said, I have massively misjudged this situation, and for that I apologise, but I would like to continue and do this exam. And I think because I just headed it off, I passed.
What keeps you up at night?
I sleep very well.
Lucky you.
So many people hate me for that, particularly my husband, but I'm not a worrier, so actually very little keeps me up at night. Sorry, I know that's a really annoying. That's a really annoying answer, but it is the truth.
What's the best piece of advice you could give someone about to start their career in advertising?
Never be afraid to ask what might seem silly questions.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was a delight.
It was a pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Favourite sandwich filling?
Oh, chicken and stuffing.
Right.